Hey, if you're a guest, if you're just checking things out today, or maybe this is your second time back, welcome. We're really glad you're here. My name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors around here, and actually, we would love to have you back next Sunday morning, 9:30 or 11. And actually, we also have Thursday night services every single week, 6:30. That's actually the very first service of the weekend. So we would love to have you back at any of those services. And a couple of things. While you're here, make yourself at home. But I also want to get a couple things on your radar. This past Tuesday night, we had our third installment of We Belong, where there was 250 plus women, ages 18 to early 80s, that just gathered to worship, pray, go deeper. We actually had a spontaneous baptism. It's pretty fantastic. I mean, awesome night. I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I heard it was awesome. It'd be really awkward. Thank you, good, it was awesome. It was so cool to hear about the team talk about it on Wednesday morning when they came in, the stories. My wife, what she said Tuesday night when she got home very late because she's a talker and just won't come home. Awesome night. And I just want to get this on your radar. The next time we do We Belong, make sure you sign up as soon as you see registration goes. We had a waiting list this past time. There was people that we couldn't accommodate because it was just too full. There's a high demand for this event. So awesome night. Also, 2 weeks from today, we're going to start a brand new series called Blueprints. And what we're going to do is just look at some of the different things that are necessitary for us. I don't even know if that's a word, necessitary. Did I just make that up on the fly? We're going to roll with it. Just things that are important, that's a word, important to be a part of our relationships. And this isn't a series on marriage. We're going to talk about all different kinds of relationships, whether it's marriage or you're single or friendships. We're going to talk about things like sex, and who doesn't like to talk about that? Who gets to be the guy in front of all these people that get to talk about it? That's fun, right? So we're going to talk about these different things that hit all of us in our relationships. What's the blueprint for our relationships to actually thrive? So that starts in 2 weeks. But today, we are in part 7 with one more week to go of our series called Everest, where we're just jumping into Romans 8. So before you do anything else, I want you to think about something for just a second. For 1 second, think about something that you would consider to be unstoppable. What's something that's unstoppable? I mean, that could be in culture, that could be in history, that could be in sports. Just think of one thing. Like the 2007 New England Patriots, they were considered to be unstoppable. As gross as I feel saying that. So they went undefeated in the regular season, that's great. It was this foregone conclusion that they were gonna be the first team in NFL history to go 19-0, whatever, until this happened. How many of you remember that catch? I remember that with great joy, great joy. They were unstoppable until the Giants stopped them in the Super Bowl. How about the Titanic? The Titanic was considered to be unsinkable. First ship of its kind in history. There's nothing that could stop the Titanic until it went 0 for 1 when it met an iceberg. Not good. You know what also was considered to be unstoppable on the Titanic? Jack and Rose's love. That was unstoppable. How'd that work out? I'm telling you, there was room on that door. There was room. I'm reading a book on the Roman Empire. Corny jokes. I'm reading a book on the Roman Empire right now about 10 different Caesars throughout the empire. Rome's always fascinated me. I love studying Rome. Rome was considered the greatest empire the world has ever known. At one point, it ruled the entire known world. We're talking Britain to India for centuries. Under Augustus, Rome was given the title as the Eternal City. That the empire would be the light of the world. Who else said that? That's kind of interesting. Rome was going to be the light of the world. The empire could never be stopped. It would always be with us. But I think a few years ago, I paid, 15 euros to walk through its ruins. Not only was the Roman Empire stopped, came crashing to a crashing halt. There's all these different things that get labeled as unstoppable, but eventually they all prove to be the exact opposite. I think we love to talk and think about these kind of things. We love to talk about something that's unstoppable, especially in a sports or entertainment genre. It's fun to think about the power and the mystique that's behind a force that cannot be stopped. And we also like to, whether we realize it or not, attach ourselves to these things. Because maybe this will give me some security. Maybe this will give me some kind of consistency. Maybe in this thing that's unstoppable, I'll find something eternal. Because that's the nature of the word, isn't it? Constantly going, never failing. We're looking for something that gives us assurance. We're looking for something that's got firm footing. If you've ever stood on ground that eventually gives way underneath your feet, it's a pretty unnerving experience. Like nobody wants to think about whether or not whatever they're standing on is going to be firm and hold up. Like you stand on ground that gives way once, that's unsettling. That happens multiple times. Now you're doubting anything that you stand on. You might see where I'm going with this. We love to talk and think about things that are unstoppable because maybe this is the thing that's going to give us sure footing. Maybe this is where I'll get some consistency. Maybe I'll get some assurance in this thing. And I think that's a natural desire that's wired into all of us. The problem is we tend to attach ourselves to things that prove to be the opposite of being unstoppable. Eventually they come falling down underneath our feet. Maybe you grab hold of a job because this company is just killing it. Stock prices are through the roof. Sales are up and to the right. We're innovative. We're poised for endless growth until a recession hits. And now stock prices just plummets. Or the leadership makes dumb move after dumb move. Or maybe we weren't as innovative as we thought we were, and we're way behind our competition. So now we've got to either lay off 75% of the workforce or the company still might go under. Like what you thought was a sure bet turns out, not so sure. Maybe you grab hold of a relationship because it's amazing. This guy is my everything. This girl is my everything. Until you find out that he's actually a moron. Or she's nothing but drama. And that was a nervous laugh right there. I was really nervous. I touched a nerve. I'm moving on quickly. You're left wondering about this relationship. What stopped it from being everything that I thought it was going to be? What stopped it? Or maybe you grab hold of a political movement. Because this is the one. This movement, this candidate is finally going to make everything better. Until that fizzles out too. Maybe the candidate doesn't even get elected. Maybe they don't do anything that they say that they're going to do. Because nothing is sure in politics, nothing. Politics are constantly changing. Movements constantly flame out. Candidates don't get elected. They don't do what they say they're going to do. Now, don't get me wrong, it's such a gift and a blessing to live in a democratic country where we get things like the right to vote. Relationships are amazing. Jobs, careers, they are a gift. But all of those things, they stop at some point. They got an expiration date. And those are just a couple random examples. You can think of other ones yourself. The point is, whenever we attach our hope and security to things that cannot give us real security and cannot realize the hope that they seem to promise, we're going to constantly be in a state of being unsure. We're going to constantly feel like we have no assurance, no confidence, no promise. So then we start going and looking for other things. Maybe over here I can find the assurance, the hope that I'm looking for in this new thing or this new person. And then eventually that flames out too. That doesn't live up to it, or that thing or person causes us more pain. So when that happens, then we go back to the past. Okay, let's go back to this thing or this person or this event because I used to think that I could find a hope and assurance in this thing, fill in the blank. Maybe we'll buck the trend this time. It's always led to disappointment, but maybe this time I'll find it. It's unsure footing. So where do we find assurance? Romans 8:26 says this. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is in the mind of the Spirit because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. That's amazing. God steps in and helps me when I'm weak. When I have no idea what to pray for, God himself prays for me. He helps carry the load. That's awesome. That's an incredible promise. That's what we hit on last week. Then verse 28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So if you have any kind of church background at all, you've heard Romans 8:28 quoted before. This is a go-to verse for a lot of people. It is a favorite verse of a lot of people, and rightfully so. Because Romans 8:28 is talking about assurance. It says that we can know, not hope for, not cross our fingers, not wish for, and we can know that God works in all things for the good of those who love him. That means if I follow the God of the Bible, he works in all things for the good of those who love him according to his purpose. That's an amazing promise. That one's awesome. That's a promise that we can easily grab hold of. But it's also one that can be hard to swallow, depending on what all things mean to you at the time. I'm all in for God working for good if I just got the job and promotion I wanted, if my entire family just got a clean bill of health. I'm all in for God working for good if I just got into the college that I wanted to get into, if we just sold our house for way more than asking price. I am all in when it comes to God working for good if things are already good. But when things are not so hot, man, this is a tougher one to take. This verse can actually be frustrating because it doesn't really seem like God is working for good when the doctor comes back in the room and says, you better sit down. It doesn't seem like God's working for good when we got 2 mass shootings in Ohio and Texas in less than 24 hours. It doesn't seem like God's working for good with what's going on with my kid. It doesn't seem like God's working for good when I lost my job. It doesn't seem like God's working for good when all of my investments, just the floor falls out from underneath them. When things aren't so hot, I'm not sure that God's working at all, let alone working for the good of those that love him according to his purpose, whatever that means. I think it's really, really easy to assume that God's working when things are great. And then it's easy to assume that he's not when things aren't so great. Notice how in these 2 verses, it's talking about this right after Paul brings up suffering. So God works in all things. That doesn't mean just the good things, because that's kind of how I read this verse naturally. It's just the good things. No. All things mean all things. So the obvious first question then has got to be this. All right, so how can I be assured that God is working in all things? Or how do I trust him when I can't see or understand the purpose of all of it? Because it doesn't seem like God's working for good, or that he can do that in cancer, or what's going on with my kid, or in unemployment, or in mass shootings. That's a very, very fair question. Very fair question. Especially when you're struggling, especially when you're suffering. Absolutely a fair question. And I think there's 2 different answers, depending on where you're at, but both of the answers come back to the same place. How do I know that God's working for all things for the good of his purpose? How will I know what his purpose is and that he's actually working? Answer number 1 is sometimes you won't know. Sometimes you won't. There will be times where you will not understand or see the purposes of what God is doing. But that doesn't mean that God isn't working. It's so easy to insert myself into this verse. That God works for the good of me. By default, that's my answer. That's how I read this verse. Be honest, is that how you read this verse? You insert yourself in there. It's so easy to translate the word those to mean me. Well, those is a plural pronoun. It's not a singular pronoun. You're welcome for the grammar lesson. It's one of my strong suits. Those mean multiple people. It doesn't mean just me. And sometimes absolutely God works for my good, and that's awesome. But it's really easy for me to think that God is here to work to fulfill my happiness, to fulfill my purpose, or at least I think he's supposed to. And if I don't realize that I'm thinking that way, that's going to cause some serious, serious tension. God absolutely loves me and loves you. He absolutely wants us to thrive. He absolutely wants what's best for us, but he's not here to fulfill my happiness. He's here to fulfill and work out his purpose. Sometimes that's hard to see. Sometimes you don't want to see that. Sometimes you don't want to believe that. And if that's the case, that will cause some serious friction for you and the people around you. So maybe whatever you're going through or whatever you went through, God was working in that for the good somebody else. Maybe it's somebody you know, maybe somebody you don't know. Maybe it's somebody that you will never meet or see. But God is working in you and through you for their good. So even though we can't see his purpose or understand it at times, we can still have faith that he's working. Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the assurance. There's that word, assurance. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So we can have faith in the fact that God is working in all things and will not waste your pain. He will work in your all things for the good of those, not the mediocre, not the make up for, not the bad, for the good of those who love him according to his purpose. That might mean for your good, that might mean for the good of the people that you love, that might mean for good of people around you, and that might mean for the good of people you never meet, see, or hear about. I told you a couple weeks ago about my friend that he lost his 17-year-old daughter in a car wreck on the way to school. How in God's green earth is he going to work for good in that kind of mess? That's awful. Well, 3 people gave their lives to Jesus about a year later. And they said it all started by watching her parents' reaction at the funeral. Does that take the pain away of losing your 17-year-old daughter? Not even close. Not even close. But God didn't waste that pain. He didn't waste it. I've got a family member who struggled with a pretty intense eating disorder in high school and college. Those were rough days, really rough days. But by God's grace, he pulled her out of that. And now she uses that to talk to other women about their struggles with eating disorders and about how it's okay to talk about that, and uses her story and her experience to bless them. Those were rough days. They were painful. But God didn't waste her pain. Kelly and I suffered through a miscarriage. That hurt. Unfortunately, miscarriages happen a lot, but people don't talk about them. So now we've been able to empathize with a lot of other people who've had the same experience, and hopefully we're able to offer some peace and some encouragement. Man, that hurt. It still hurts, but God didn't waste our pain. It wasn't in vain. There was a purpose. God will work in your all things, and your all things include the dark, the painful, the regretful, the shameful, whatever adjective you want to put in there. He will work in your all things for the good of you and or other people you may or may not know. God will not waste your all things. So the next question is, okay, well then how do I really trust that he's doing that? How do I have faith and understand and have evidence that he will do that he'll work in my all things? The answer is just look at the past. Where has he done it before? Sometimes that might not be obvious. Sometimes you need to do some self-reflection. Where has God worked in my past before? Where has he worked in my all things for the good of me or for other people? That will allow you to trust. So a while ago, I was up for a job. I was asked to interview for a job that I thought it was a really good fit for. I thought I was actually the best person for that role, and I wanted the job. The interview process went on for weeks, and during that time, some really shady stuff happened. A guy I worked with lied to me and undercut me. Another friend of mine said some really, really out of bounds things to me and about me that just kind of derailed the whole process and came out of left field. That hurt. I mean, it felt like I got stabbed in the back and then sabotaged. Felt like somebody that I thought was a trusted friend just betrayed me and then dragged me through the mud. And for what? Like a job? That's not worth it. So I was frustrated, I was angry, I was confused. Like, God, how are you working in my all things right now? Because I really don't see it. I couldn't see it. Looking back, I can see what he was doing. He was doing a couple different things. Number one, I actually wasn't a fit for the job like I thought I was. And in fact, if I would have gotten that job, I think I would have hated it. I would have burned out in 12 months because it just didn't line up with my strengths. It didn't line up with my gifts. Number two, God was breaking me down. This is one of the ways that he teaches humility. It is never fun in the moment, never fun in the moment. But I'm always grateful for it in the aftermath of it. And what he was doing was he was humbling me and trying to make me more like his son. And then number three, this is the big one. If I would have taken that job, if I would have gotten it, there's no way I would be at LifeBridge today. No chance. There's no chance. He was working in that to call me here. That was painful. It was frustrating. I was ticked off. I was confused. I couldn't see that in the moment, but now looking back, I can see what he was doing, looking backwards. Also, I want to serve you all for the long run. So I hope that was also for your good. The jury's still on that. You can talk to me about that later. But God was working in that thing for the good of me and hopefully for the good of other people. When you don't know, you can know this, that he will work, he promises to work in your all things for your good and for others to fulfill his purpose. Sometimes you'll see that purpose, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you need to look backwards and see how he's worked in the past. And then you remember, all right, God, you've done it before. I've seen you do it before, I trust you. I trust you to do it again. Verse 29 says this. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. That's the purpose right there. To be conformed into the image of his Son. Every single thing that happens in this life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is meant to make you more like Jesus and prepare you for the glory that's coming to you if you trust and follow him. If you trust and follow Jesus, he will work in your all things for his purpose, and he promises to do that. That is a promise that you see in Genesis, and it ends in Revelation. Here's a couple examples. Job 42:2. I know that you, God, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Psalm 138:8, the Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. Isaiah 46:10, my counsel will stand and I will accomplish my purpose. Philippians 1:6, and I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ. I can keep going if you want. More and more of that. And I say all those, I'm throwing all those out at you, not so I can be up here blabbering about what I think God's purpose is. I want you to hear what he says. And over in scripture, he says, I will, I will, I will. And I've done it, I've done it, I've done it. The God who spoke into existence the mountains that we see right outside our front doors also says to you that I will, I will, I will, and I've done it. I've accomplished my purpose for me and for you. That's assurance that you can take to the bank. There are so many things. There are so many things in God's purposes that we cannot see and that we cannot understand. But we can know that he's doing it for his glory, to prepare you for glory, and to make you more like Jesus. Well, awesome. Quick question. It says predestined and foreknowledge. That sounds kind of weird. What's that all about? Now, if this language is foreign to you, let me just kind of give you a real quick rundown of what it is. These two verses are hitting on something called the doctrine of election. And this is a doctrine that people have discussed and debated, and unfortunately at times they've let it divide. Christians have. Now, this is a doctrine we absolutely can study and should. It's one I've spent a lot of time on. We can discuss it, but we should never ever let this divide. This is never meant to divide. So we're not going to dive into the nuts and bolts of predestination and foreknowledge, because Romans 8 isn't about how God does it. It's about why and what for. Amen. And Paul answers those two questions right in these verses. Why? He says to conform into the image of the Son. Everything that happens is meant to make you more like Jesus. That's why. And then the what for is for your assurance. It's for your confidence. Notice how in these two verses, it's all about what God has done. It says nothing about what you or I do. None of it is about us. It's all about what God has done. And it's all in the past tense. He even says the word glorified, like it's already happened. But that hasn't happened yet. So why is he talking like this? God's saying it's glorified. You can trust it like it's already happened. That's how sure it is. This is the kind of assurance that we get in Romans chapter 8. This kind of assurance is unstoppable, it's unbreakable, it's the only real assurance we have in life. This is what we can attach our hope to, our security to, our assurance to, and our eternity to. Everyone's eternity is attached to something. What's your eternity attached to? Is it attached to something shaky? Or somebody that's unstoppable? Great, Matt. Well, what do I do with all this? That's easy. You respond. You respond. Man, if you already trust and follow Jesus, this is meant to be a massive, massive encouragement to you. This is assurance. And where do we get that in life? We don't get this assurance anywhere else in life. And this isn't small things that God's promising. No, he says, I'm assuring you that one, you're justified. That I'm going to help you when you're weak. That when you have no clue what to pray, I'm going to pray for you. That when you're struggling and suffering, I'm going to carry that load with you. That one day I'm going to right every single wrong you have ever experienced. That you're going to be glorified. That's what you're promised. That's amazing. So respond to that. Amen. Gratitude, worship, humility, all appropriate responses. We stand up and we respond to it. Also, don't be afraid to stand up to what God's called you to do. Don't be afraid to stand up and be a part of what he's called us as a church to do. Jesus says that, hey, the gates of hell will not prevail against the mission I have for my church. So we have nothing to worry about. We're going to hit that next week. And if you don't know Jesus at all, if you wouldn't consider yourself a Christian, you can respond too by responding to that stirring that's going on right now. Maybe there's this little tugging that's happening right here. Maybe you feel like you're drawn to Jesus, but you got so many questions. Or you're not sure he would really want you if he really knew you. Or you're anxious because I'm really not sure what this means for me. You can still respond. You have been made in the image of God. You have intrinsic, eternal value. But just like everybody else in this room, you've been separated from God by your own personal sin. That's not meant to be offensive. That's not judgmental at all. Not at all. Me too. I was separated from God because of my sin. But the other side of that truth is this. Hey, you are separated from me, but I'm going to make it up. My son's going to come and give his life and pay for the penalty of your sin on the cross. And by his life, by his death, he's going to make up for your death. He's going to pay for it. He's going to fill the gap in your life so that one day he can say, right now, you're justified when you respond to him. Right now, you're innocent when you respond to him. Right now, there's grace when you respond to him. And then one day, your rights, your wrongs are all going to be righted and you will be glorified. Romans 10 says that anyone who believes in their heart and confesses with their mouth that Jesus is Lord will be assured, will be saved. That's how you respond right now. And then if you do, Romans 8 says, no more condemnation. The world may condemn you, you may condemn yourself. You're not condemned anymore. And that's a sure thing. That's assurance. So respond. You don't have to have your life all cleaned up. Don't come cleaned up. You don't have to wear a mask. Be real, be authentic. We're all broken here. I'm first in line. You might have doubts and questions. Me too. Bring them. You don't do this alone. We will walk with you. I want to give you a chance to respond 2 different ways. Number one, after the service, man, if you're ready to respond to Jesus, if you want to talk, if you've got questions, if you want to be prayed over, just stay where you're at. Just stay in your seat. Once everybody leaves, we're going to have staff members that are going to walk around. If you're there, we'll come to you. You don't have to worry about it. Just stay there, and we'll let you respond. The other way to respond is baptism. Baptism is this outward display of this inward transformation that goes on when you say, I'm accepting you, Jesus. I don't have all of it figured out. I got questions, but I want to put my faith and trust in you. I want what you're offering me right now. I want to follow you. Well, the next step is that public expression in baptism. So what that is it's a picture of you dying to yourself. You're dying to yourself, you're being buried with Christ. That's why we dunk you in water. It's a symbol of that. And then you're being resurrected as a new creation coming up out of the water, just like Jesus was resurrected. Jesus modeled this for us, and he commanded us, and he said, this is a gift. That's the next step. It's someone saying, I'm all in. We had one baptism Tuesday night. We had one baptism Thursday night. We got 7 more this morning. So if you're ready to respond, stay where you're at. Afterwards, we'll come to you. And if it's baptism too, let's talk about that. But right now, we're going to worship, and then we're going to watch and celebrate as other people go all in, all right? Let's stand up.